title is Diversity Equality Inclusivity. So a little bit more about that later. Today's slightly different. I mean, previously it's just me with two other guests. Today there will be four of us. So I'll just speak up and shut up in a few minutes, and I'll join you a bit later on. So I'd just like to thank the main organizer, Hong Kong Institute of Architects Biennale Foundation, who is the main organizer for the event, and the co-organizer, Hong Kong Institute of Planners, as well as the Hong Kong Designer Associations. The main theme or title of the Biennale is, of course, 2x2, Imagine to Innovate. And our title sponsor, very generous, DBS Bank, has been very great and very supportive of our events throughout the pandemic. And we're now rolling out these online events with full support. And also for this particular event, we have the venue sponsor in this beautiful building, Hall Park Music, and co-organizer, the RIBA Hong Kong chapter. So the sub-themes for the Biennale is identity, livability, and sustainability. And I suspect this particular event will straddle somewhere between livability and sustainability in terms of what we're going to talk about. So without further ado, what I would like to do is hand the mic to our moderator today, who is Sarah. Sarah is our curator for the Biennale, and she will be telling you all about, introducing the guests and telling you all about what we're going to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, and hello everyone, and I'm Sarah. And I think today we have an interesting composition for the panel because because we have 5 females here, and with Roger being the odd one. And yeah, of course, because of today's topic is about diversity, equality, and inclusivity, we definitely want to hear some, I would say, some different voices on this topic, but at the same time having Roger in so that he can share with us some different perspectives on the same issue. And we're very honored to have two speakers from London today, and both of them had actually lived in Hong Kong before, so they understand our culture and also the situation. So we have Lindsay from Bespoke Careers, and also we have Joe from Allies and Morrison in London. Yes, and on my left side we have Javian, and so she's a practicing architect in Hong Kong, and she's representing the Hong Kong Institute of Architects. And on the other side we have the academic field. We have Eunice from the the University of Hong Kong. Okay, and shall we start with our international speakers for their sharing, and then we will try to tap in different questions, and then I think Roger will be helping to ask questions from the male side and see how we are going to have this healthy discussion or equal discussion today. Okay.
Great. Well, I'd like to very quickly introduce Lindsay. Lindsay, I've known Lindsay for a very, very long time, and I wouldn't say how long. We just give both our ages away. So anyway, Lindsay has been a great friend of mine in that she's been working in recruitment for many years, and the motto for the company is, they're designers. They're all, in the company, all the recruiters are all designers, architects, so they know the requirements and so on and so forth. So, in London, they have offices in London, in the States, as well as in Australia. So they know a lot more about how different cultures look at equality, inclusivity, and also diversity. So without further ado, I will hand the mic over to Lindsay, and she will show us some slides as well, I believe. So thank you very much, Lindsay.
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me to join. It's a privilege to take part, and I hope you're going to enjoy some of the insights I'm going to share with you. So I'm going to begin by introducing myself and my company, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the cultural differences that I've observed working in the UK, Australia, and the States. And then I'll talk to you about some initiatives that I've noticed kind of happening in the last few years in the different regions we work, mainly to kind of address the gender pay gap. And then I'm just going to touch on some things that I've observed in the last kind of 20 years of interviewing architects around the world. Here goes. Okay, so as Roger said, I'm a qualified architect, a British architect, and I run a company called Bespoke. We're a global recruitment firm. We recruit from our offices in London, Sydney, Melbourne, New York, and Los Angeles. Before I set up Bespoke, I practiced as an architect in London and Sydney, and also over there in Hong Kong. In Causeway Bay, actually, where you guys are sitting now. Since leaving practice, I've spent 20 years recruiting architects. So yeah, I've got quite a good insight into kind of what, you know, the kind of gender pay gap and what things seem to be working and what don't. In terms of clients, I work with a really wide variety of practices, from kind of global players like ADAS, KPF and HKS, Gensler and the likes, to kind of much smaller boutique companies. So I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective from kind of all scales as well. So when Roger invited me to take part in this, I know that he was interested to know if I had any kind of insights into the cultural differences between how practices were approaching kind of equality and the gender pay gap in the different regions we work. My experience has been that there aren't actually huge differences, particularly in the regions I work anyway, which tends to be in the UK, Australia and the States. I think what I have observed is that potentially in London anyway, there are lots of more initiatives and kind of the kind of quality and quantity of the kind of groups there is ahead of what we see in Australia and the States at the minute. In London, there's a huge amount of events. The Architects Journal run Women in Architecture. You get individuals setting up littler networks like Chicks with Bricks. You love or hate the name. There's kind of private groups like Part W, the NLA have inspiring women's programs that you know, the kind of, it feels in London almost like a week rarely goes by without the opportunity to participate in a kind of, you know, a female networking event around the built environment, which is great. I think in the last couple of years, we've seen more of this in the States and in Australia, but it seems to be, yeah, it's probably a couple of years behind. So, you know, I've been invited recently and attended things in Los Angeles and Sydney, and we can see more of that happening, but maybe not quite as much yet as we see in London. So that is a little bit different. In terms of the kind of job descriptions that my business get and the adverts that we see, and say again that in London there's kind of more of a kind of focus on using inclusive language and just you know, actively encouraging female applicants. Again, we're seeing a little bit more of that coming through in the other regions. Now, I think what's really encouraging though, kind of across the board and not only in the regions we work, but there seems to be a kind of, it's widely accepted now that having you know, a mix, a genuine 50-50 mix, it is not just a moral responsibility, it makes sound business sense. So I think, you know, that is really, really positive, and we're seeing that in a lot of regions. So in preparing for today, I spoke with a number of practices who, you know, we've seen achieve success addressing the gender pay gap and the equality issue, and asked them kind of what advice they would give to others looking to do the same. And while all of them had a slightly kind of different response, obviously, and a different approach, there appeared to be kind of 5 things that they were saying from the outset they thought were important to do. Yeah, I've listed these here. I think one thing was to kind of assess honestly where your business is at the beginning and kind of take a view on that and kind of draw a line in the sand and say, you know, this is where we are now. And then begin to agree kind of diversity targets moving forward. I think one of the things that people were keen to do was to have that at all levels. So it's not just kind of, diversity at a junior level seems to be easier to achieve, but, when you get to the kind of board level or partner level, so you need to set those at all levels. Developing a plan was considered a kind of, critical to kind of, it's a roadmap to where you want to be. So I'll talk about that a little bit more detail next. And part of that, ensuring that you set kind of realistic goals and kind of at achievable timescales, not too ambitious, but, obviously as ambitious as possible. And it was felt it was important that you measure against that regularly and kind of keep a check on things. So in terms of what a plan might look like, these are some of the things that the practices were including and have discussed with us over the years. I'm going to talk about each of these individually, but basically it's, a diversity champion was a big thing. Recruitment policy, how, what moves you make when you're recruiting, looking at pay and promotion procedures, project opportunities that you're giving the teams internally. So making sure that they're equal. External business opportunities and also training and mentoring. So I'm just going to talk through each of these. So in terms of a diversity champion, it was felt that having a champion, or actually champions in some cases, in the larger studios is really critical to achieving success, having someone driving this forward in your kind of organisation. But I think the things that kept coming out of this is that they need to be empowered to deliver the programme, and that they have to have the ear of the board or the business leader. So so that they have to be listened to, I guess. Again, I touched on this. It's about reporting regularly to targets and kind of timescales that you've set, and making sure that happens. And like a lot of things in life, there has to be consequences if the milestones aren't achieved for any reason, and kind of record what those are. So the reasons for that happening. So yeah, diversity champion, something that a lot of the practices who seem to be doing well in the kind of in this respect have in place. And so recruitment's obviously something, it's an area I'm very familiar with, and there are a whole host of things that practices do to try and ensure equality and make sure that there's a balance. So one of the things that we hear more and more often is briefing us as agents to provide 50-50 CVs, and in terms of, so if I'm submitting 4 people to an application for Joe at Allies and Morrison, 2 of those must be female and 2 male, which is, it's something that we're seeing increasingly and being asked for. The other things that are to potentially remove genders or names so that they're gender neutral when we put the applications forward. And again, something that we're being asked for more regularly. Ensuring a 50-50 male-female interview panel is something, it's more rare than the first 2 I've mentioned, but it's something that we have seen more recently and really makes sense. And we have actually we've had interviews cancelled if the practice haven't been able to get a male and female interview panel together, which is pretty good. Documenting why people have and haven't been selected. So, thinking about unconscious bias and, why people haven't been recruited is sometimes as important as looking at who you have. And I touched on this earlier. It's about ensuring job descriptions and the adverts that you put out use inclusive language and are kind of encouraging applications from both sexes. There's obviously a lot more in recruitment, but yeah, this just kind of touches on the things that we're seeing more of, and I think that really make a difference. In the last few years, we've seen kind of some of the most progressive practices doing a lot of work to ensure that they do fair pay and promotion, and looking at those procedures. The sort of things that they've been doing is reviewing and addressing inequalities at all levels. So doing that as a project and saying, right, okay, where are we? Let's really have a look at this. Implementing transparent salary bands is something that's again much more prevalent. So if I'm sitting next to a male colleague, and we're at the same level, there is a band between which we are both paid within that guideline. That we're both going to be in that band. Recording reasons salaries vary between individuals at the same level. When you're doing reviews, really looking at everybody within a certain band, and there may be reasons that someone's being paid more or less, but at least if you look at that and kind of at least annually assess where you are, it helps again with unconscious bias or people being overlooked. Recording reasons that bonuses vary for the same reasons, and also when individuals are not promoted, what are the reasons for that? And then kind of going a step further and saying, okay, well, what training could they have that would enable them then to get to the promotion? Are the sort of things we're seeing. In terms of projects, opportunities, some of the practices we work with have been working really hard to ensure that both sexes are getting equal opportunities when they're resourcing projects. The sort of things include monitoring who you put into bid documents. Have we got a 50-50 balance at every opportunity? Because if we win that project, we then are committed to have those people on board, and that's a way of making sure that we're resourcing them in a 50-50 way. Maintaining, this is something I've seen a few practices and smaller ones as well doing, is maintaining lists of project architects who are ready for that next stage. Being a project architect and getting that first role is a real stepping stone in your career. So actually keeping a kind of record of people who are ready for that next step and ensuring that 50% of them are female is a way of pushing equal genders forward to the next stage. So something that I think works well. Ensuring kind of on-site experiences offered to male and female equally is something, from my time in practice, I personally experienced that it was sometimes trickier to get that site experience than potentially for my male colleagues. And certainly when you're looking at going to do your part 3 and you need that experience, it can hold you back if you don't get that opportunity. So I think having a focus and really ensuring that you're giving that to both sexes equally is important. And keeping resourcing records is something that certainly bigger practices seem to be doing to ensure that you're getting 50-50, and if that doesn't happen, why is that not happening, and you have records of it. The same applies to external opportunities. Progressive practices are increasingly maintaining lists of networking opportunities to ensure that they're gender balanced. The same for speaking opportunities, and giving pictures and presentations to clients and potential clients. Certainly, in terms of networking, sort of even 5 years ago, an event in the south of France called MIPIM, it would have been very, very male dominated, and the last certainly 2 or 3 years, I mean, sometimes I thought there was even more females than men recently, which is very good to see. But certainly when I started going there 10-12 years ago, it was nothing like that. It was very, very male dominated. So I think you can see the efforts that practices are putting into this, and really shining a light on it is making a difference. And a similar approach, I guess, applies to training and ensuring that both sexes are given equal opportunities in this respect. And training, it's you can absolutely say, right, okay, are we training our male and females in the same way? Is the budget split evenly? Things like future leaders programs, making sure that they are split, and mentoring opportunities. I think one of the things that not all practices have embraced, but those that have speak really highly of it, is the kind of formal and informal advocacy programs. So it's felt that even the informal ones work really well. There's a senior female architect at Grimshaw's I spoke to, and she spoke passionately about how she has a junior architect she thinks is fantastic, and she speaks for her in board meetings and resources meetings to make sure that opportunities aren't missed, puts her forward, and it's not necessarily a formal program, but she champions her to make sure that her career is being managed and she's being helped, which seems to work very well, and yeah, potentially something that you could do more of. And of course, unconscious bias kind of behaviour upskill sessions are something that we're seeing a lot more practices implement for their management team to ensure, if they're recruiting or they're mentoring people, that this is all done without unconscious bias. So, Roger, you mentioned when we spoke about this recently that you thought that wasn't something that was as widely kind of taken up in Hong Kong at the minute. So I have more information on that. If anyone would like some more, you can let me know, and I can share with you what practices they're doing with that. So as we know, one of the reasons for the gender pay gap is the kind of lack of female architects at kind of senior board level. And the reasons for this are obviously complex, but I think there's no doubt that it's partly due to the fact that women, me included, leave the profession either to pursue careers in other paths or to look after their children and their families. And I included this because inflexible schedules and kind of long hours are often cited as the reasons for leaving architecture. So I think one of the things that's really obvious is the practices that I've observed making good inroads with equality and the gender pay gap have put a real kind of focus on flexible working arrangements. So I was just going to talk through a little bit about that. I think, flexible working, the first things you think of are working from home, part-time working, school holiday arrangements, and staggered, start and finish times, job shares, and the likes. But I think, more recently, what we've seen is kind of practices genuinely promoting shared parental responsibility. They're identifying, working and really focusing on what activities can be done working from home or from part-time by men and women in order that they can, share the responsibility for their children when they need them. And things like what we call kind of soft landing policies for men and women. So things like return to work baby bonuses, where the kind of that's for men and for women. So if they're returning to work, whether it be part-time or full-time, financial help to help with childcare before the children start school and that sort of thing. But it's for both sexes so that we're promoting that throughout. So that kind of concludes my, there's obviously a lot more things that practices are doing, in inequality, but that gives you a kind of a flavour of the sort of initiatives that we're seeing in different regions to help address the situation. There's many more, and I'm happy we can talk about those potentially in the questions. But I'd like to finish up with something that I've observed from my time interviewing men and women over the last 20 odd years. And that's that I love this quote by Zaha Hadid, Heidi. I couldn't agree with her more, that women are just as capable of designing skyscrapers as men. However, you know, in interviewing male and female architects for over the years, I've been really noticed, I'm kind of struck by how men have been more drawn to the kind of large scale kind of infrastructure, railway projects, airports, and indeed skyscrapers. Than women have, and you know, similarly, when we put adverts and we were, you know, resourcing for projects like education, private residential, cultural buildings, we've tended to have more female applications. This really struck home to me when a few years ago I was asked by Hassel Architects in an Australian practice to recruit a whole team of rail architects for them to take from the UK to Australia, Sydney and Melbourne. And we found them some fantastic architects, really. You know, they'd had a huge amount of experience, they were very happy, and they kept coming back to me and saying, Lindsay, have you got any women? We need some, you know, we need to address this. And you know, I was working really hard to try and find them, and it was really challenging. And I think, you know, I have been thinking about this for many years. Why is it certain sectors seem to appeal? And I don't know the answer to it. But I kind of like to close with a question, you know, is the fact that we have more females, you know, going into certain sectors because of the architectural education we have? Is it to do with our secondary education? Or potentially, is it because when, you know, we encourage our little boys to play with Lego and Airfix kits, and you know, our little girls to colour in and you know, dress their dolls? I don't know the answer, but it's definitely something I've noticed, and I thought could be quite interesting for us to discuss after Jo's done her piece. So that's me closing there, and look forward to having some questions.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I thought I'd just say that we haven't been very rude by just reading something else, but I've been looking at the attendance behind the camera. It's great, you know, very very diverse. We've got male, female, we've got practitioners, we've got people from the government, and we've got students and so on and so on. So I'm pleased about that. And also I've been monitoring some of the questions. So Sarah will have the questions with her, and then what we will do is that we'll run through the presentations as well, and then we'll answer those questions. So keep the questions coming, and we will make sure that they're answered. So thank you, Lindsay. Can you unshare your screen, and then we can. Excellent. So shall I introduce Jo, and then
yes, please.
Yeah. Our next speaker, Jo. Interestingly, this session almost instigated purely by Jo. I mean, a few months ago when I asked Jo about what should we do and what other topics we can talk about, sustainability and so on, and she said, well, gender pay gap. You know, she had been involved with the RIBA in the gender pay gap report, which I think she's very passionate about, and I think you know, what it would be great that you know, for her to talk more about it to us. And so I think, Jo, you ready?
So I've taken a slightly more personal point of view than Lindsay, so thankfully we're not going to be saying the same things, but I think we're good friends, and actually a lot of what she says I'm totally supportive of, and I've taken a few tips as well, so that's always good when going to a lecture. Allies and Morrison been going 36 years. I joined 34 years ago or something terrifying. We're now a big practice. We're one of the 10 largest practices in the UK. And this is all kinds of stats in terms of the kind of organization that we are. So we're over 250 people, and we have to report our gender pay gap to the government annually. And I would like to say that that process and being a practice of that size has actually given us real benefits in reporting and thinking about the consequences of what you're reporting. And it starts with a little bit of a history in terms of how I got here. This is actually me in 1983 getting my degree with my very proud step-grandfather and grandmother. So it's been a long journey. And when I started in practice as a qualified architect, I joined Allies and Morrison in 1988. And I joined in 1987. This is a picture of us that appeared in Building Design in 1988. And here I am as the only woman. And we were a very small practice. So at that point, this was the practice. So we've grown over time. And that journey, oh, the date's fallen off the edge, sorry, 2018. We're already here, around 300, a very diverse, energetic, good office. And we have done everything. These are projects that I've been involved in, from a school in Primrose Hill. This is Newnham College, Cambridge, student accommodation. This is the Institute of Criminology in Cambridge, and the Royal Festival Hall, which was a huge restoration and heritage lottery fund project, finishing in 2004. As well as I've worked on offices for the BBC, which was a great pleasure, taking BBC offices into open plan, producing flexible workspaces. And then more recently, I've been delivering a skyscraper. So women can do skyscrapers. This is 100 Bishopsgate, just recently completed in the City of London. Sorry, too fast. So 2001, I became a partner at the practice, and this was the partnership photograph. As we have progressed, here I am giggling in the middle of a practice of the year photograph in 2015. We've been very proud about our journey. And yet I looked at this photograph in 2017 of the new partnership. We're now a partnership of 18 partners. And there's something missing here. We are only 2 women out of 18. That happened to be the same year that the AJ100 made some top trump cards as part of their AJ100 ceremony and dinner and everything else. And we all got a set of these top trump cards. Now, I'm very proud that our practice had the highest percentage of female architects. So if you get a set of these top trump cards, there's a fact you can use to win the game. Now, I was very surprised that we were the highest one, because I expected various practices who I respect universally, potentially to be better than us. So if you look at these figures, it was surprising to me that Zaha's office was at this time only 36% female, and that Foster's was only 37%. And it kind of got me thinking, we have a good overall percentage of women, so why do we have so few women at the top? This was our gender pay gap report, our very first gender pay gap report. And to understand gender pay, one of the key figures is the median pay gap. So you will see, as part of the analysis, you have to break down the different quarters of your pay groups and see what the percentage of male and female in each quarter. So this is dividing our salary groups into quarter. And you will see that we're pretty good in the lower quartile and the lower middle quartile and the upper middle quartile, but we're deficient in our top quartile, 35% women and 65% men. This was in 2017. And I went to talk to Ben Derbyshire about what leadership the RIBA was going to be able to give on this issue for practices across Britain, because we were just all starting to publish our figures and there was very little guidance about for the profession. I then did some research of my own into trends in the progression of female students. When I entered architecture school in 1980, and actually the figures only go back to 1981, there were around, in my year, we were 12% female. At this survey level, it starts, the grey bar is entering students at part 1. There were around 20% of women entering architecture school. In 2017 to 18, it was at 50%. So that's a fantastic change. But it does say that there are fewer older female architects in the market because we weren't trained. But is that a good enough excuse? When I went to see Ben and say, what is the RIB going to do about this? What leadership are they going to offer? Because as Lindsay says, there are lots of women's groups talking about these issues, but what is the Institute going to do to give leadership? You have to be very wary about asking questions like this, because Ben just turned around and said, I don't know, Joe, what are you going to do about it? So I had a good conversation with him, and we agreed that actually a report on closing the gap, how to address the gender pay gap, would be beneficial to the whole industry. And these are some of the highlights from the report. It's more than an issue of fairness and equality. It's good business sense. Organizations which have different perspectives are more creative and more innovative. And highly inclusive organizations are much more capable of meeting financial goals and generating higher revenue. There is statistics on this stuff. Gender diversity provides a competitive edge. Even in architecture, as Lindsay said, it's impossible now to go to a job interview without a balanced team of people presenting to a client. They're not expecting it. They're not really interested in having an organization, particularly if you're a larger scale, not having a diverse presentation. We have the potential, by closing the overall gender pay gap, to create an additional business GDP in terms of revenue. So this is a real win for the future. What that meant was looking at the whole life cycle of an employee, starting at the top, trying to attract talent, recruit it, bring them on board, make them feel that the practice is somewhere where they can be involved, that there are people of empathy, that there are groups who will represent them, that there's good mentoring for development, that you create an environment for retention, and if indeed you separate, that it's a good separation and that you can maintain a long-term relationship with your staff. So in this gender pay gap report, which is online on the RIBA website, we focused on 3 areas: recruitment, progression, and retention. And then there are 5 points in each of those key areas, which then ended up, there's this double page spread in the report. And each of those 5 headings is then given some detailed advice on what you might be able to do. So in terms of recruitment, make certain you're advertising roles transparently, include women in shortlists or multiple women in shortlists, and consider anonymizing applications. Make certain that your interview selection processes are unbiased, structured, and skill-based. So we have a very formal application form and interview process. We always have 1 male and 1 female in an interview, whatever the sex of the person being interviewed. Operate transparent and fair processes for setting salaries and encourage salary negotiations by sharing salary ranges. And make the senior leadership team accountable and aware of unbiased recruitment. So this guidance is available to all practices, and I think it applies wherever you are in the world and whatever the size of your practice. In terms of access, that seems to be recruitment again. Anyway, there's a page for each of these. This is on progression. This is promotion, returners, i.e. people returning from leave, maternity leave, how to welcome them back. Alternatively, students returning at part 2. Encourage people to return from maternity leave on things like 3-day weeks. We allow everybody to reduce their working week when they're a returner. Support a strong mentoring program. Consider female leadership training, or make certain that your leadership training is balanced across the practice. And appoint a diversity champion or a diversity task force who's somebody with a senior role across the practice. So there are pages on this for each section. And then this is the retention. Flexible working is key. Improve your workplace flexibility. We've all done that in lockdown. There's much more flexibility. Architects have learnt to work remotely. There's going to be a huge shift of ability and balance within the workplace in the future after our COVID-19 crisis. We are positively in our practice, and this says encourage the uptake of shared parental leave, take steps to understand and improve your practice culture to make certain everybody is equally valued, engaged and supported, operate transparent, balanced and objective appraisals, and develop an action plan. So many of the things that Lindsay has said are replicated in this report. We then ask people, RIBA chartered practices or RIBA individual practices, to close the gap and make a pledge to close the gap. So signing up, people who have signed up to this pledge commit to operating fair, equal and unbiased recruitment and promotion procedures, support flexible working patterns, introduce greater transparency, ensure equal opportunities for career progression, promote equal opportunities, appoint diversity champions, and take targeted evidence-based action. So all of those things were part of a pledge. You can still sign up to this pledge. So what's happened? That was a report in 2018. This is the latest figures I had, which was June last year, on women, female architects in the profession. It's grown slightly. We have a big problem of people leaving the profession. As Lindsay says, recessions, anecdotally from our own practice, recessions often, we lose good female architects in a recession for a variety of reasons. Some is they're a bit sensible and they go off and find higher paid jobs in other professions. So there's a brain drain due to low salaries. Some take up caring responsibilities because caring costs are high in the UK. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but it is a problem in the industry. In 2019, we were lucky enough to be the second practice recorded in terms of our median pay gap. Hawkins Brown are doing better than us, well done them. But in 2019, we've managed to reduce from that 10.3% in 2017, we're now down to 6.1%. And that is because we have a plan, we have a diversity champion, and we're very committed to closing this gap. So it's not a very steep curve, but we started at just over 10% and we're now just over 6%, and there's more to do. So it's none of these recommendations go away. This report won't be unfashionable or out of date. It's long-term guidance that we're interested in. And this is one of my favorite people. This is Brenda, Baroness Hale of Richmond. She was the head of the Supreme Court. She acted more recently on the Brexit court case. And she says gender parity amongst judges in England and Wales should be achieved by 2033. But the future of the higher courts doesn't look so rosy. So that's pretty impressive. You wouldn't have thought the crusty old judges had a plan to achieve gender parity. So what is our plan? What is the architect's plan? I think we probably need to have one, but we're not alone. We shouldn't beat ourselves about the bush too much. Other professions, this is the Lancet, which is the medical journal in the UK. And in science, the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization's Women in Science data shows that, I think it should be fewer than 30% of the world's researchers are women, comprising only 19% in South and West Asia. I mean, that's amazing. I was very shocked by that data. So we can do this. We can achieve equality and diversity. In the UK at the moment, there is more focus on this diversity, and so there should be, because the architectural profession has a woeful standard in the UK in terms of its wider diversity, and that's definitely the challenge for the future. But doesn't mean we can't still keep pushing to close the gender pay gap and push for equality. That's me, done.
I didn't really realize the differences in, for example, gender pay gaps, or even the percentage of female and male workers. And I started to calculate it. In fact, in my own practice, we had 80% who are female colleagues, while we only have 20% of male. So we think, oh, maybe on the other hand, is another question of equality and also diversity, because it doesn't mean we need more women or men, but in a way where we could have the equal opportunities, especially in mentor program. I do feel that when I used to work in other practice, and I didn't find the right mentor or someone that I could look up to for the right types of management skills. And the point that I was struggled, because I felt that I need to work like a man, or I need to manage like a man. But then it took a long time and a lot of error finding out that's not I want, or that's not something we used to be. So how we can ensure this diversity champion, not only from practice, but also maybe from academic side, and even like in Hong Kong, from the Hong Kong Institute of Architects, anything that we are pushing towards this line, I think it will be worth discussing in this area.
Yeah. Your thoughts?
I do want to, am I allowed to ask questions?
Well, of course, yes.
So I just heard about Lindsay being having experience in a lot of different countries, and I just want to hear your thoughts on where Hong Kong sits in comparison with the UK or the US or Australia.
I haven't actually worked there very recently. I think when I did, I would say I definitely didn't notice as many of the initiatives and the kind of networking events specifically targeted at women as I do definitely in London and probably actually in the other two regions we work. So that may be a timing thing. You guys will know better, but I can't recall actually, maybe one or two, but I don't recall there being anything like the number of kind of initiatives.
Yeah.
Is that the same now?
Well, I'd just like to add something to that, in that, well, obviously, the RIBA has obviously had a number of female presidents. You know, we've seen that, and so has the Hong Kong IA. In fact, one of them is actually our audience tonight. So, hello, it's President of Hong Kong IA. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, you know, we talked about at the top, but we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. I mean, from most institutional point of view. But then I think in a way, I would like to hear. I mean, there's also a vice president in Hong Kong IA, president in the audience. You know, I'm not just only because I'm not exposed to it, I'm not sure, you know, whether there are similar efforts behind the scene that's kind of addressing these issues. And if there are, you know, perhaps I don't know whether, you know, because you've been involved with the young members group, whether that's an issue that has been in the young members groups or not.
This is a weird way to reply this, but going back to why I asked that question is, while you guys were speaking, I was amazed at all the stats and the data that you guys have from the UK and everywhere else. And it just dawned on me that there is no specific study, or there hasn't been one, or I haven't seen one, mentioning what the situation is like in Hong Kong. So I don't think the Institute has done a survey or any sort of research on this, but I think this should really be what we should do to push this forward. Yeah.
So to that, I would like to add, that what Joe showed, the AJ 100 and all that, actually is a publication. And I also know that we have publishers here in the audience. It is both ends, not just the institute, but also the marketplace. The issue needs to be made more aware, and therefore it's a joint effort. So it's a challenge that we're going to throw out to the public publishers to do what the AJ 100s do, and I'm not saying name and shame, but do a league, to see how things work. And I'm also pleased to inform you, I've just had a message from another big company in Hong Kong, not an architect, but a consultancy, whose director is a female, and she just texted me saying that she's just downloaded the Closer Gap report. So I mean, it's the good news. But anyway, sorry, I shouldn't talk too much. But anyway.
No, but when we're talking about this, I don't want to leave the schools behind, because one thing that I observed is, I think 2 years ago when I was teaching at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and there were only 2 female, which are full-time teachers in school, while there were 80% female students in the class. And so I tried to ask Eunice about what's the situation in the University of Hong Kong, especially Joe, you taught at the Hong Kong U before. So what's your experience that you could share a little bit?
Actually, I'm going to answer this in a roundabout way, maybe by getting to Javian's earlier question, which is that I can say for a fact that, because I've started to research this in the last 2 years, that there hasn't been a report of any interest here in Hong Kong. I also looked at Singapore as a comparison, because these are the 2 interestingly ex-British territories, as well as the more advanced cities in the region. There hasn't been that, and I suspect, and at the moment they are kind of more speculative, that a variety of reasons, including of course cultural baggage, as well as the fact that these were the 2 cities where earlier on there was seeming parity historically, in the last, I would say 40, 50 years. And starting from the 70s and 80s, seeming parity compared to the region, say, other cities in Asia. So it hasn't been an issue that's been foregrounded, because for the most part, it seems pretty equal. Yeah. And so no one has actually felt that there's really, in terms of universal education and so on, we have reached that quite a while ago. Compared to so it's always in this situation. So I'm really glad that there are lots of diverse interests in the region, because I think it's way overdue that we should look at where we're at. And I do want to add, and I'm going to let everyone else chime in, that it's also not just the numbers. That I think one of the things to note, and we go to the question of inclusivity as well, because it's not just limited to the women, but it's also whether we're thriving in the profession. And I think that's really important, being sort of straddling education and also practice. This idea of maintaining a career in this profession that is such a long, it's a very long drawn career. And so going back to Sarah's point about mentorship and how do we actually develop that and also become that, the possibility of also participating in mentoring. It's really important.
I think it's true. I think in a way, as I was looking at all the facts and figures and so on, it could equally apply to different form of diversity, not just the gender. And I think that's a very, I mean, we've only got an hour or two, so we focus on gender, but it's very, very, very applicable across the board. I think that's that's a very good point.
And I do agree that one problem we have is we haven't really started the discussion properly. So I think this is a very good opportunity that we explicitly think about, oh, this is something we should start looking at, start to research, or start to collect data from the whole practice or the industry.
Yeah.
Because without that data, I always keep swinging, both ways constantly, because at the Institute, we also, it seems to be a very fair situation. A long time ago, we already made sure that, all the jury panels have female presence. There are a lot of females in our office bearers, our Young Architect Award winners. This year's YA panel, actually 4 of the jurors were actually female. And so in the Institute's point of view, it's a very fair situation. And then when you go back to talking with your peers, actually my male peers actually feel that it's very unequal, because they feel that we take too much attention and that they're, unequal.
Yeah, a sort of oversteer.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
So I think stats and just really, neutral data would be a really good way to start.
I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, what's your view, Joe and Lindsay, about this sort of oversteering kind of effect? Do you see that in the UK? Do you get a sense that, like what Javier says, the other half of the divide seems that the female getting too much attention?
Yeah, just like we have 3 female peers.
Yeah, I know. I don't mind. It's okay.
So I'll go. No, I don't think there's too much conscious bias going in the other direction. I think Lindsay commented that it's much easier in the capital city. So it's much easier in London to have a diverse practice. So the data is different in different parts of the country. I think the data's mission critical, because otherwise you're just inventing how it feels. I think the data actually, I mean, we thought we would be better than our data when we first started doing it, because we had a higher percentage of women than most practices. So we've had to improve things as a consequence of the government forcing us to provide the data. I don't mind that. We should be doing this kind of data for all aspects of our equality and inclusion strategies. So I'm very, we have lots of measures in place. So for example, we have a Women at Allies and Morrison group, otherwise known as WAM, not in honor of George Michael, but just as a group where people can get together and have a safe space to talk about things. I think we have, some of the measures I've talked about, we're really promoting shared parental leave, so that the men are also taking parental leave. And they have very interesting conversations. They come back and go, well, I needed to leave on time for my childcare. And I go, welcome to my world. You get much more balance when people are having to approach the same thing. But I definitely don't feel that the measures that we're taking are too strong in terms of steering the conversation.
What about you, Lindsay? Your thoughts on this?
I agree. I don't think too strong at all. No, and I think the shared parental responsibility and kind of the more kind of it's almost going a bit deeper. I think is really positive. I had a look, actually. It was interesting seeing your stats on the number of females who were going in to study architecture, and then looking, at Allies, one of the best in this respect, and then only 2 at the top out of 18, I think you said. I think when I joined architecture, it was kind of more like 40-60. And the higher as soon as you get to kind of part 2, you see the numbers drop, part 3, and then you see that reflected at partner level. So I don't think it's too far at all. So no, I think the measures are good, and you probably do need to do the study, because with in the absence of the data, then as you said, it's just how it feels, and that may feel different in your sphere and your kind of little world, but the overall, you need to look at the data, and then you can have you can begin, draw the line, and begin to plan how you address it.
I'm talking about Roger mentioning about that we only started with this gender equality, but we want to look at a bigger picture of diversity. There's one question from Flores, which I think I could share here and see how you guys think. So this question is about, can you please elaborate on the purpose of gender diversity in terms of performance? And the workplace itself needs to be welcoming for all in terms of culture, respect, and recognition. Inclusiveness relates to all kinds of backgrounds, qualifications, and experience, as well as gender and diversity. So I think this is a good starting point to elaborate on our topics. Even apart from gender gap, how do we see the equality and inclusivity in terms of qualification, backgrounds, and experience? Maybe from Joe?
So this is from Tim, isn't it? So my answer to this is fairness and equality makes good business sense. There is research that highly inclusive organizations are more capable of meeting their financial goals and generate 1.4 times rather more revenue. So the evidence says that businesses which are more diverse increase their cash flow, and that they're better businesses. The report is all noted in the gender pay gap report, but the research is there, and I think you can feel it in an organization. You can feel it on teams. You get better teams when there's a balanced project team, and that's anecdotal, but the research is there, and it's referenced in the gender pay gap report.
And I actually wonder, when you first started this gender pay gap exercise, do you receive a lot of rejections, or are people getting struggled about, because everyone thought they were fair, or everyone feels that they are fair. So what are the challenges when you first started this type of discussion, or start gathering or raising the awareness from the peers? Anything that Joel or Lindsay could share?
Sorry,
even especially from the bots, from offices who want to recruit new members, they always say, okay, we have to be fair enough to everyone, even from different backgrounds, different culture. So how, when we start to raise the awareness in how could we be explicitly fair or inclusive, what are the challenges that we have faced or you have faced in the process?
Okay, so we still have a challenge with this. So in the industry, there's still a challenge on this transparent pay bands, because everybody in architecture uses different titles. And so I was trying to get some equality in how we report that. So we might have a title in our office called associate, but an associate, for example, at Foster's might be somebody more senior. And therefore, we as an industry, we use these titles to our own individual arrangements, and it's therefore very difficult to compare data. Every time the Bespoke or the AJ salary data comes out, people come running around and say, oh, look, this is the pay band I should be in. And we say, no, but that's not the same group in our practice. You're this group in our practice. So I think it would be great help if we were more consistent. So we've started to make our pay bands reflect how many years of experience after leaving part 2. So from memory, we have a band which is 0 to 2 years post part 2, and then 2 to 5, and then 5 to 10. And it's less about the qualification than the years of experience after university. But we're still struggling. We haven't got enough transparency within our own organization on salary pay bands. So, you know, that of all the things to do, there are always things that you can improve in your own practice. There's a whole gambit of issues and to improve. And I took some tips from baby bonuses for male and female staff. That's a new one on me, but everybody across the industry is trying to improve things, and we learn from other practices. So that's also the challenge, is keeping the conversation going and being open to new things.
Thank you, Jo.
You were going to say something, Lindsay?
Yeah, I think I agree with Jo. It is difficult because we obviously, you know, we write the salary guides as well based on you know, the positions we filled, and I think that is true. But it's, you know, you can definitely start by making bandings within your own practice. So that you know, my example, that if you've got a female and a male architect who you know, or someone of a different race or whatever it is, the equality is there because your level of experience is here, therefore you know that you'll be within that band. And I think as a first step, if practices don't have that, is a really good thing to do, because you might be surprised. I think you said yourself, you were surprised when you looked at your own practice. You thought you were being fair, and the data, when you're faced with it, can be, I think often is very surprising. So you know, you can start with that. If you just start with the bandings in your own practice, you know, obviously, as Jo said, it's more difficult to compare like for like because the titles are different and it means a different thing in a different organization. But the first step can be to do that internally and be transparent about it. And I think, you know, when we're interviewing people, it's one of those things where people feel, if they feel that it's unfair, it's, you know, that's part of the reason you lose people. You know, even if they're not the same and the result's still the same, and you can explain why that is and it's genuine, then, you know, I think people understand it. But as a first move, definitely doing transparent pay bands and promotions is a really positive step.
Lindsay. And can I actually throw a question to Eunice, because I understand you, apart from Hong Kong, you're from Singapore, and also you stayed in Shanghai for a while. So can you share the differences or any similarities among these cities?
In terms of parity?
Yeah.
You know, I was just listening to the conversation, and lately because I'm really on board with what we've been discussing, but lately I've been a bit thrown off by questions of diversity, and it started because about 2 over years ago, I was in a very similar conversation with a lot of maybe 100 in the audience, mostly women, but some others, and there was a question that threw everybody off, and this is in a predominantly Chinese audience. This was a non-Chinese individual who was a junior architect who had just started out and felt that the conversation was not about her because the inclusivity is for a predominant group, that even though she shared the same gender, she didn't feel that, I mean, even though she's of the same gender and she's a female, she didn't feel that she was necessarily included in the conversation, because she felt that the diversity was only gender as considered. So I started to, in the 3 cities that I navigate in the last decade or so, started to get very sensitive to this question of gender and race, the word that we actually don't talk about here so much in Hong Kong or even in Singapore, but everywhere else is discussing now, and starting to think of them together as well. And so, and this, I would say, not so much differences, just similarity. So what is happening is these different, very thriving Asian cities, practice there have dramatically changed. For example, in Shanghai, where I started, I set up my office there about 15 years ago. And it was difficult to be even on site as a relatively young kind of woman architect. But now that's really different now. And so that's not, it's not so much discussed anymore. However, that elephant in the room is always the same thing about another type of someone who's a little bit different or who doesn't look like, how do you kind of, so it's no longer just about gender. So I know I'm taking it a little bit off topic, but it's very much something that has been preoccupying me. So in Singapore, of course, in the last 6 months, gender issue has been very much in the background as ethnicity and other issues have been foregrounded. And this has also triggered reactions in the profession as well, with regard to, for those, for these cities where we don't even have data with regard to gender yet, things are happening simultaneously. So I would say, we also do need data, and maybe not so much just data, but methods of developing how we see inclusivity is here. So gender being a very important one, but also we have to unpack culture, of course, also. But I think race being an important one. And I feel it's important to bring them up together because often, I also, I teach architecture history as well, and often I realize that to go back to Lindsay's question on the skyscraper, I think it's very much symptomatic. Why the skyscraper, stand for this kind of modern ideal that in our own discipline and the way our discipline has been developed as the history of our discipline. And so I think, anyway, I am complexifying the issue, and I feel that I need to because so that when we talk about collecting data for us who haven't actually got the data, we may have a slightly different way of maybe adding other factors to that collection.
Yeah. I mean, it is a complex issue. So you're not making it more complex than it is. But it's interesting because here I was thinking, in Lindsay's presentation, and also in Joe's, there's a lot of 50-50. Because when we're talking about gender, it is kind of 50-50. But whereas when we talk about race, you need to think about, well, different locations. Like even for Hong Kong, because there's no point in thinking that we need to have 50-50 diversity in the office in terms of race because the population, the demographics isn't that. And therefore, when you transpose it into different cities, different cultures, then they'll be very, very different. So I think the gender one is a slightly more clear-cut 50-50, whereas when it gets to much more complex issue, all these sort of cultural differences will come into it, making it much more complex.
So I think that's a really good point, and I think it's a very good start with the gender in terms of 50-50. And I think when we talk about inclusivity, and I think both of you mentioned it, in terms of looking at skills, looking at things that basically are inclusive, that actually minimizing or getting rid of stereotypes and biases. It's very, very challenging, I know, but I think it's a good struggle to have. And schools are going back and forth on this, I think. And even though everybody wants to go forward, but the current situation, it looks like schools are going back and forth. But I do think that it's because we're talking about inclusivity and diversity in one together. And so it's a really good start as a basis to, from the 50-50 as a starting point, I think.
Yes.
And I do want to add one more response, which both of you raised so many kind of, I'm taking mental notes. But there's one on reciprocity that I really appreciate, which is that if we want to really, I think you asked that question, if we really want to go towards 50-50, I think there has to be reciprocity in a way of, say, for example, maternity and paternity leave should be sort of reciprocal if you do want to encourage equal parental responsibility. And I think we can take the first step to, even though I used to think that, you know, well, I got through all that time. I deserve more leave, you know. But I really do think that if we want to kind of advocate that, we kind of have to be really, what's the word for it? Really have to kind of believe that, you know, that's where we're going. Yeah. The university have a really interesting, because I think the father gets 10% of the leave, I think. I think they get, used to be, and it has increased to 2 weeks, I believe. And I think for the women, it has been increased from 2.5 to 4 months. But obviously it's 2 weeks and 4 months is quite different. So it's a very progressive way to think of evening that. So what you're saying is that all of them have to be in place. You know, you can't really have one or the other. So.
Well, I think Eunice's points reminded me of what I think Joel has shared in the first few slides about flexible arrangement at work. Because I think every office in the world now needs flexibility, because we don't know when we need to work from home. And then it's actually a golden opportunity for us to create this equality, because no matter you are the father or the mother, now you need to work at home, work from home. So everyone shared the same like household responsibilities, taking care of the kids. I do have a lot of male peers who thought working from home was disaster, because usually they didn't need to manage the kids, but now they need to share the responsibility. So I think though it was very challenging and difficult, but it's actually a very golden opportunity for us to change the mindset or perception.
Well, I think we don't have any more questions from the floor, and I think we've had a very, very good discussion. One thing that I want to pick up on is that, Lindsay, you mentioned unconscious bias, which I thought was a very interesting point. Have you been through an unconscious bias workshop?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Because it's interesting, because one of the things that we do when we have to go into the RIBA Council was go through this thing called the unconscious bias workshop, which it was an eye-opener for me, because basically what it says is, us human beings, male or female, we are hardwired to process information in a certain way, based on our experience and based on our background, to screen off something without us knowing. So that's where the unconscious bit come in. And the workshop actually helps you realize that in first hand through some exercise. And I think that was very helpful, because not it will change you completely, but it makes you more conscious of your unconscious bias. And I thought that was very, very good. And that's why when Lindsay put it up in her slides, in this draft, I kind of picked it up as in that's because I haven't seen it here in Hong Kong. So that's what I was saying, that it was good to test if it is something that's. But then on the other hand, I want to borrow in the last curatorial conversation, I borrowed a phrase from a very famous movie about sustainability. I said the holy grail of sustainability is not to talk about sustainability, right? So in a way, the holy grail of gender pay gap is not to talk about gender pay gap, because there's nothing to talk about. In a way, I wonder, for the lack of data, maybe, I don't know, for the lack of data, is it that we don't talk about it much here? Is it because we're already there? I don't know. So the lack of data actually works, it's so that we can't shout about it, even if we are. So I think that the data is actually very, very important.
And I'm sure that's something, especially we have people from Hong Kong, JPM from Hong Kong, and so Roger still working with RIBA. Yes, I think that's something that Hong Kong needs to start. And especially maybe for the unconscious bias workshop, we should just do one in the next curatorial conversation.
We should find somebody who's qualified to do it, to do it. And the one that the RIBA did with the council, I thoroughly recommend it, definitely.
And I think just a quick follow-up from the complexity circle or complex topic of diversity, I do think from the Hong Kong Institute of Architects or even RIBA, Hong Kong chapter, that could be something to work around this. Because I agree that we don't normally talk about this topics in Hong Kong. We could feel some differences, or even some people would tend to go to RIBA, some people tend to go into Hong Kong IA. But so why would this happen? Or is there something that we could be more inclusive in a way? I think that's a very challenging step, but good to start.
I think, like I said before, it needs to come from bottom up, top raised and sideways, and that, you know, we need to demand for it. We need to demand it from bottom up. The government needs to come down on it. You've got to submit your report like they do in the UK, and from sideways, because in a way, you know, to get the marketplace engaged, you know, like the AJ, the public publishers here, the magazines here, where it becomes something, you know, I like this session to have been seen by hundreds of people, but we don't have that reach. So, you know, I think we need to come in from all directions, and I think this is a very good start as a conversation. And we will, you know, like all of our curatorial conversations, this will be recorded, and an edited version will be shared on our YouTube channel. So everybody, the audience, want to share it with people they think should know about this. Please, I think that would help us very much.
Definitely. And anything you would like to add, or Joe or Lindsay?
Joe, Lindsay, anything you want to add?
Thank you very much for inviting me to join. I think we wrote the guidance in order to encourage a more inclusive workforce. So it's not only about women, it's about the wider inclusivity in the workplace. So I'm hoping the guidance applies to all, and all of us need to be careful every day to be as inclusive in our work environments as we can be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Lindsay, closing remarks from Lindsay.
Completely agree with Joe about the kind of inclusivity and wider diversity, and it's very appropriate, obviously, at the minute in the world as well. So yeah, I agree. I think, you know, the thing about the gender one is it's clear, it's easy to measure, which isn't as easy with social mobility, or, you know, even with race, actually. What, you know, if someone's been born in the UK, but, you know, then where does that stand? That's kind of, you know, but they're not originally from there. So I think it's harder in some respects to measure some of the other diversity issues, but yeah, I agree with Joe. We've all got work to do, and we need to be careful. And you can start with yourself and your own business and your own social circles, and yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, Lindsay.
So thank you, Sarah, for hosting, for being a great moderator, and such a relief I don't have to do it. So you've done very well, and thank you, Eunice, for joining us, and Vivian for joining us. So this is the fourth curatorial conversation in a row, almost weekly since the first one was the 16th of June. So we're going to have a little break. So there isn't one next week, because we are gearing up for the next big one, which is on the 30th of July, because we talk about sustainability a lot in our Biennale, but I don't like just talking about it. We're doing something about it, and we actually commissioned a report on how sustainable the Biennale was in terms of our carbon footprint. I've read the first two drafts, fascinating reading, and there would be a bun fight between the exhibitors and saying we are the most sustainable. So, but it's an interesting read, and also through a generous sponsorship, we have earmarked some money for carbon offsetting. So we're doing something about it. And on the 30th of July session, we would have our consultant who will explain about the report, and we'll have our exhibitors who will join us online. But more importantly, we'll start talking about how we're going to spend that money to offset the carbon offsetting, because there are many different schemes around. We could, the food waste is one of the things that our sponsors are very keen on. So maybe we might even run a little kind of exhibitors vote or audience vote in terms of, some money where they want to spend. So have a rest for next week. There won't be a curatorial conversation, but stay in tune for the one on the 30th of July. And until then, I think it's a big goodbye from all of us. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.